Welcome to Ignition Leadership Podcast, leading with fire and building with purpose. All information and opinions are of the hosts and guests and are not affiliated with any organization. Here are your hosts, Jamie and Bob Howarth.
This is your host, Jamie Howarth.
This is Bob Howarth.
Kendall could not be with us today because he's trying to work out some schedule stuff at work. But we're excited to be here. We are a couple days late because I worked 24 on, 24 off, 24 on, 24 off,
Yeah.
24 back on. Yeah. So we just weren't available for the Tuesday part of it. We are excited to be here. We are going to be talking about tradition versus culture today. I've actually gotten really good feedback about the podcast. I looked at some of our stats and I wanted to share a couple stats with our listeners. First and foremost, thank you so much for the feedback. We really appreciate it when people reach out to us or give us suggestions for things that they want to hear. We have received feedback that people, especially newer officers, don't have these topics really talked about or explained in their OJT process.
Well, I think some of that's going to come out in tradition and culture of why that doesn't occur.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear your thoughts on that. If you are tuning into our YouTube channel instead, we've also had people ask if we were recording in different rooms. We do not record in different rooms. We usually sit at this table together. It's just Bob is on his video and I'm on my video. And then Kendall is in a completely different state. He's in the Carolinas. So we thought today that we would try to give you a video that is the two of us together in the same frame. But yes, we do sit together. We just thought it would be easier for the video process for us to be separate.
I think it's much easier when we're sitting here together talking to each other.
Instead of the screen. I'm trying to talk to the screen a little bit. Anyway, so our stats have been really interesting. The whole reason that we started Ignition Leadership Podcast is because we wanted to reach people. I feel like I have 25 years of experience with my volunteer experience, 21 career, and you have
A lot.
a lot. Yes,
40.
40 years. Yeah. And Kendall also has almost 20. Like he's like, with his volunteer service and he's up there quite a bit too.
Yep.
So between the two of us and Kendall, that's a lot of years of service.
Absolutely.
I also think we've done a lot of trial and error, things we've learned along the way. For the same reasons that we're doing this podcast, I think is the same reason we have a lot of listeners that we do, because we didn't have guidance on a lot of these things, the understanding of the why, how to handle different situations. And the purpose, I feel, of this podcast is to give some tools or some nuggets to our listeners, and then they go back and they have thought-provoking discussions with other officers or with their crew, and they discuss some of the things that they've either experienced or the way that they could change their mindset going forward.
Right.
And that's something I think is really, that's why we're here.
Yeah. And I think that when you really get into this, there can be some very controversial cultures, traditions, whichever one you want to say. You can find controversial things, but not
Yes.
designed to just be controversial. It's designed to cause you to think and ask yourself, do we need to change it? Is it right? Is it wrong? What are we doing? It's question provoking, not
Yes.
just trying to be controversial.
And listen, we don't have all the answers.
Right.
I learn something new every single shift. I think that's the way that it should always be. We should always be learning and growing. And especially in the battalion chief level, I have found myself questioning a lot of these things as far as what is a cultural thing versus a traditional thing? What are the way that people see things from their scope or from their lens? And having come up through the ranks, I feel like I've just seen it from so many different sides.
Right.
And you have done a lot of different bureaus in your career where you've seen it from operation and information management and FIB and fire investigations. It's just a completely different lens. I was in training. Kendall has a lot in training. To see things differently and to try and understand it from different perspectives.
Well, it's also not just the different bureaus, but my experience comes from volunteer career and then also the police academy.
Oh,
I
right.
went through the police academy at 41 years old. It was rough.
Are we going to tell everybody what it is to start?
They could figure it out. But I went through at 41 years old and it was rough. But there was a lot of cultural and traditional things in the police academy that some worse, some better than the fire academy. So having the perspective of it is a good, something else that we can discuss a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's why we're here. That's why we're doing this together,
Right.
because we have those different perspectives. And again, I know that not everybody is going to agree with our views on things. I don't agree with everybody's view on things either, but it's just to put it out there for
Right.
people to discuss it. So anyway, back to our stats. We have reached 100 cities and 4 countries with this podcast. And that is just mind blowing to me.
Not bad considering we've only done 3.
Yeah, we're across the United States, Canada, Ireland, and Sweden. I think it's really interesting, like how we've been able to reach those different areas. I think LinkedIn has something to do with it.
Yeah, I do too. It's, I'm surprised that we haven't hit like England or Germany or France. I would have thought them before Sweden,
Yeah,
but great. Love it.
yeah. Maybe somebody from Sweden can reach out to us so we can learn a little bit about their culture, the fire service. That would be
Absolutely.
amazing, right? So all right, we're gonna get into it. We're gonna be talking about tradition versus culture today, what we believe the differences are, and it's just to make you aware of really what the definition of the two are and how we should not be using tradition as an excuse for poor behavior. I think that's really an important aspect of it because I feel like often we are mixing the two up, and it's really easy to do when you listen to what the definitions are. And we should be moving the culture forward, but with the intent of preserving the tradition of the fire service.
Right.
I think where we came from and our roots is super important to where we're going, but we still have to evolve.
So it is important to preserve the roots of the fire service with tradition. But I think that it escapes a lot of people that they look back and say, well, it's a tradition to do this or it's a tradition to do that. But they only talk about the traditions that were positive. There was a lot of traditions back then that turned out to not work or be negative. And those are traditions that you don't want to necessarily continue on or preserve. And it happens a lot.
Well, I hate to say it, but usually when it comes to negative behavior, it's usually a cultural thing and not a and not a traditional thing.
The behavior is what the actual, what happens is the tradition. The culture is the behavior that allows it or keeps it going. Here's an example. If we were preserving tradition, we'd still be wearing 3/4 boots. That was tradition. For years, that was tradition. We went to bunker pants. And now if you told people we were going to wear 3/4 boots, they'd be like, are you crazy?
Yes.
So
We're
that's a
going to get
tradition.
into that because I want to start with that exact thing as an example. So I do want to read what a culture, in our case, as we've discussed in a previous episode, metaculture, right? Is a bunch of different backgrounds coming together and creating our own culture in the fire service and then tradition based on that. So culture or metaculture in our organization and in the American Fire Service, it's defined as common beliefs, values, and social interactions within a group. And those 3 words are the words that I want to drive home with our listeners: beliefs, values, and social interaction. For tradition, tradition is passed down for generations, usually involves core values such as pride, duty, honor, and is related to an event or practice. Now, for me, tradition is the definition of the fire service when it comes to pride, duty, and honor. Those are 3 things that we hold in very high regard. We do what we do because of pride, because of honor, and because of um, that feeling of duty to serve others.
Right.
And that is actually what I feel brings a lot of us together that creates that metaculture. We all start with that with that drive to go out and do big things and to make a difference. And I joke about it getting pulled over
Right.
as a reason why I started in the fire department. But really, deep down inside, I had wanted to be a police officer since I was in kindergarten. And it still has the same basis, right? You still have that pride, that duty, that honor to want to serve people. You have to have that serviceship in order to get into a job like this at some level.
Right. You have to have that serviceship, but you also are very much influenced by I'm trying to think of the word
I
that I
don't
wouldn't,
even know if serviceship is a word.
you just made it up.
We're
It's
gonna
a word now. It's a word now. But you have to also take into the fact, I didn't know anything about whether or not I wanted to help other people or do things like that when I was 6 or 7 or 8 years old. But I absolutely knew that when the local volunteer fire department came to the bridge at the bottom of my driveway and started drafting water, it was the coolest thing I could watch. And that's what started. And then as I learned more, it became, hey, I do want to help people, and this is a great way to do it.
They were drafting water at the end
Right.
of your driveway, and you just thought that was the coolest thing in the world.
Right. They came there for training, and that's where they would train to draft. And I would be at my house, which sat up on a hill, and I would hear the fire engines pull up down there, and I would be like, oh, this is going to be the greatest day. And I would take off on a big wheel, ride to the bottom of the driveway, and sit there and watch those guys. And they were all very friendly. They all let me, you know, touch and help and move hoses and things like that. I wasn't really doing anything, but I thought I was the greatest thing going.
Okay, so first of all, I want to know, and it sounds like they talk to you and they let you participate.
Absolutely.
And what you're saying to me is you really found a sense of joy in helping them.
Yes, I did.
That
That's
is the
true.
that is the basis of that feeling or what drives us. So even though you were helping them as a team and it made you feel included and it made you feel involved in something great, even at 6 or 7 years old, if you don't realize that that's what it is, it really does show that even, subconsciously not knowing at a young kid age that you just really like to help.
Right.
And it was really fun to be able to participate with that. And you knew you were doing something good.
Yeah, it drew you in. If they were
Yeah.
standing there with a garden hose, the green line,
Yeah.
it wouldn't have been nearly as exciting. But when
Yeah.
they were flowing from the gun and you're watching these 1,000 gallons of water a minute hit the trees and break the branches off, and it draws you right in. And
Yeah.
then you learn that helping is fun.
Yeah. And like from Kendall's perspective, he's a multi-generational firefighter. But for you and me, the story is a little different. So I actually kind of envy Kendall some because he was raised getting to know all of those things and
Right.
getting to see that. Now, my parents were really hard workers. And so I did get to see what it was like to have hardworking parents that did have a sense of service, even though it wasn't in the fire department. I was raised with my beliefs and my social interactions is that we work hard, we contribute, we don't take away from society, that we are, we're always being a part of the greater good. So even though I don't have a firefighter in my background, I still think it had the same principles as I was growing up that made me drawn to either the police department or the fire department. And just a little sidebar, my niece is looking into to joining. She's actually a volunteer now in the same jurisdiction that I work at, and she's looking to apply at the same jurisdiction that I work at next year. Actually, this year.
This year.
Yeah, the next test that they have. So we might have a multi-generational firefighter
You should be
in our family soon. Uh, anyway, we got off topic. We're going back to, but that is tradition, right? Like that
Sure.
goes back to multi-generational firefighters. It was tradition for you to be in the fire service. It was tradition for you to follow in the footsteps of your parent. And we still are seeing multi-generational firefighters to this day. I did notice recently that we are actually seeing a lot more daughters in our jurisdiction that
Okay.
are becoming multi-generational.
I completely Agree.
Yeah. I was thinking about that the other day, and that right there tells you that the culture is changing.
Right. The tide is turning
It
for sure.
is. Yeah. And they are, just love them. I love these daughters. We have a generational firefighter that's a female. She might have more than one in this class. And in the previous class, we had a couple, and they are fierce and they are getting it.
Yeah.
And I love it.
And I've also seen that when you have a multi-generational fire service, that the people that come in knowing the job tend to take the initial training and the initial actions towards becoming that firefighter a little more seriously because they already know. They know what it's going to be like once they're done. Some people come in and are scared to death going through the academy because they don't know what tomorrow is going to bring.
Oh, I had to talk to my dad on the phone every day when I left. And he called me on the phone in the morning to make sure that I went back. Um, when I was 20 years old, it was scary. And I really didn't know much about the fire service, but I did have one person in the academy that just kind of stood by me and gave me a lot of support. He was in my class and, we're still good friends to this day. He's moved on to a different department, but, um, we're still in contact. And I really give my dad the credit for me for where I am today.
Sure.
For me sticking through it, for me showing up every day. He wanted to see me get to that finish line. And once I made it to that first finish line, it was like there was nothing to stop me.
Right.
I was going to keep going. And it really made me feel good when I would have my promotional ceremonies that he would be there. And I know how proud he was of that. Now, it did scare him too. Being a first generation firefighter, he didn't know what to expect either. Like
Right.
his family doesn't know what to expect. And getting that support from them could also be different. I was fortunate, but he also would come to the firehouse and he liked to speak to the drivers. And he always wanted to the drivers, especially when I promoted to officer, because they would be supplying me with water. And he felt like that was super important. And somebody who's not in the fire service, he recognizes that that is a really important job.
Yeah.
That's our lifeline. Um, so even though we do not come from traditional fire department families, I do think that we come from backgrounds that gives us service and gives us that pride, that duty, that honor. And that has carried over into to us succeeding in the fire service. And you don't have to be a generational firefighter to do well in this job.
No, not at all.
You just have to have grit and commitment, and you just don't give up. And it really is perseverance. And there's so many people out there these days that can absolutely do this job, and I want to see them do it. So don't be discouraged if you don't have a background in firefighting, or if you don't have a background in multi-generational firefighters. Definitely get in there, and you might fall in love with it. I
Yeah,
hope that I did.
it doesn't hurt to try.
Right.
It really doesn't. And if you don't succeed for whatever reason, that doesn't necessarily mean you're a failure.
Right.
It just means that you're not successful at this particular time or with this particular skill. You can try again.
Right.
There's a lot of things you can do.
Well, you miss 100 of the shots you don't take. Maybe it isn't a job for you. But
Right.
if you're interested, go out and get it.
Right.
Anyway, okay. So I feel like we've covered tradition really well, right? Like we've kind of discussed the background and what tradition is about. I think we should shift to culture. And actually, I think your 3/4 boot example is both, right? That's where the line starts to get a little fuzzy. And we're not really sure where that line kind of blurs. For example, you talk about it being tradition. I do think 3/4 boots were traditional. I do have a question. Did you wear 3/4 boots?
I wore 3/4 boots both as a volunteer and very, very limited as a career firefighter, not on structural fires. We had 3/4 boots that we could use on brush fires. We had 3/4 boots that we could use for pump outs, etc., but we did not wear them on structural or vehicle.
Okay.
They were more of a quote unquote, radiate. It's the
So,
best way to put it.
so when you got in 40 years ago, we had already moved on
We did have,
to, in a sense,
we were moving on. When
right?
I first became a firefighter as a volunteer, I was issued bunker beds, but
Mm.
there were still a lot of firefighters who were older that were wearing 3/4 boots.
Okay, that is a perfect lead into the cultural thing about it because they had the ability to wear the the more modern turnout pants, right? But they still chose to wear 3/4 boots.
Sure.
What is the reason behind that, right? Why did they choose that? Did it is it because they felt comfortable? They didn't believe in it. You guys are so weak these days. You can wear the 3/4 boots and go in and you don't need that shit. Like you just don't need it.
Right.
So I do think that's where we get hindered when it comes to a cultural thing. I think the number one thing that hinders us in the cultural aspect does come down to safety. If you think about some of the cultural things that we hold on to and then we call it in the name of tradition, it really is a safety issue. So 3/4 boots, right? Turnout pants were better. They were starting to be issued across the American Fire Service.
Mhm.
And people, if you were lucky, and you were able to get those, that they were becoming more available. But people were just so set in their ways. So they didn't want to accept that new way or that new culture that was coming forward. They thought it would take away from it, but it hasn't taken away from the fire service at all. It's enhanced it.
I'll give you an even better example. The volunteer fire department was purchasing a new engine not too long after I came in, and it was going to be the first enclosed engine in that company.
Yeah.
And there was a battle over air conditioning, and we thought we should have air conditioning in the crew compartment, but there was a lot of people who said, "I didn't come in the fire service to be cool. I don't care. We don't need air conditioning." That's that's really starting to move.
Here. Now, I love that air conditioning.
I'm not sure they would sell you a fire engine now without air conditioning. I mean, it's
We put them out of service in the summer
correct.
when we don't have air conditioning because it is a safety thing.
Yeah.
Um, that's interesting. I've never heard that one before.
Yeah.
Some other things that I think are cultural that we hold on to the name of tradition, and we've alluded to this before, is it's usually related to hazing. For example, you're to be seen and not heard, or we're going to stand you in a corner, and that hazing is hindering progress. So it was done to me, and it was done to my boss's boss, and that's just the tradition of how we break them in. But all it does is just separate you from them, and it separates you as a team. And you're supposed to be a high functioning team going to work. So for me, it's like that is a cultural change that could improve our team's performance. And I also don't think, and you'll be able to expand on this. Did we really think about it as a team sport back in the day like we do now? Like, was it really like everybody is together and, the buddy system and stuff like that? Or was it kind of more of a free for all?
So I think you can look at that two ways. If you go back in the history of the fire service, back to the days of Ben Franklin and the days of the insurance plaques on the outside of the houses,
Well,
as the fire department came into your community and your house was on fire and you had a Philadelphia fire insurance plaque, okay, well, we're going to take care of that. But if you had a different fire insurance plaque, they were going to wait for some other person to come and fight your fire. And when you talk about teams, they would literally get in fist fights between the two of them because one team thought they were better than the other.
oh, that actually happened. Not the fist fight part. Well, yes, actually the fist fight part. When I volunteered.
Yes.
Um, but it was not about plaques. It was getting the fire first.
So but that is how teams have also evolved.
Yeah.
They were teams back then, but the team now has evolved into a different outcome. The outcome back then was we're going to get that fire. The outcome now
Wow.
is
Yeah.
we're going to fight that fire and control it, and we're going to do it together. efficient.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do think it is like an efficiency thing, but we all want to go get this fire.
Right.
And that's going to come down to tactical discipline, which we are going to talk about in another episode. Um, Probably going to be a longer episode. I do think though that with that comes the responsibility of being able to say, okay, well, you know what, we weren't first in, and that's not our job to be first in this time. Our job is to be second or third in. This is the best one. Our job is to be writ. Nobody wants to be writ until it's time to be writ.
That's exactly right. I've
Right.
said it so many times.
Yeah. So in that situation, fire is blown out of the house. You get there, you're assigned writ prior to arrival. It's your job to be writ.
Right.
It's not your job to get into a fist fight in the front yard. And that's a cultural thing that has evolved. For me, I've seen that evolve where people are exercising that tactical discipline more. And that is actually, I feel, contributing to putting out the fires faster and safer. And it's better for the community and better for occupants if they're trapped because of the way that we are approaching the fires now.
So we're approaching them now. The efficiency really comes into importance because of the changes in what is burned.
Yeah.
30 years ago, the house burned and it took 12, 15, 16, 17 minutes in some cases. The
Right.
studies are showing before it went to flasher. Now we're talking about 3 to 4 minutes.
This is a sidebar, but Jackson is behind you trying to lick stuff out of it. Our dog is in the stage making noise, but I don't want to stop him right now because we're in the middle of record. Yes, absolutely. But then you have to evolve
Yes.
because what's burning is evolving and the systems are evolving. And also we're closer depending on what situation you're in. You have rural firefighting. Do you have a hydrant? Do you not have a hydrant? Like the way that you approach it. And in my career lifetime, a cultural change that was really hard for us was switching from, I want to say, the NIM standard to SOGs.
Yes.
For more than half of my career and half of my time as an officer riding the front seat, we we relied on that first two engine as that officer. As people were coming in, they were arriving on location, and then you were assigning them.
Right. It was completely command driven.
Yes, completely command driven, which studies have shown over time and time again, line of duty depth reports, that community based firefighting and the structures that are mostly related to community based, the SOGs is what is most effective and in the end result of putting the fire out quickly, efficiently, and safely. And one of the things though is like, okay, well, that's not as much fun,
Right.
and then that's where your culture comes in because you have to recognize that change and what has changed, like you said, with the
With the
construction,
materials.
right? With the materials that we have to put forth the effort to make the change because we are in an inherently dangerous job. Absolutely.
You can't make it completely
No,
safe.
you can do the right thing and still get killed.
It doesn't even matter. You'll have people say, well, you could fight every fire from outside and you
Oh,
wouldn't.
yeah.
Well, even if you did that, you still have to get there. There's always something that's
Yeah.
not going to be safe about it.
Yeah.
It will be reduced, but there's always something. There will be an injury no matter what.
Right. And then it does come down to what your mission is. And I think that's where like the staying outside part is that doesn't help the community. That's not beneficial to the community. That doesn't support our mission. However, how we do approach the fire and learning fire behavior, that's something that was not learned back in the day either, the way that we have learned it. And a lot of this stuff comes from line of duty death report.
It does.
And then we're still doing the same things and making the same mistakes and not learning from them because of tradition or culture. Which is it? What do you think?
I think it's culture.
Right.
I think it's, but we have to, you have to also look at it from a person's knowledge of the change in what has happened is what helps that culture of more efficient things like that. They have to know that these items have changed. You can still see, uh, if you look at a YouTube video or an article and you, you skip past the article, skip past the video, go to the comments and look at the people who you can tell from their picture, they've been around for more than 40 years.
Okay.
And they're making a comment that
Oh,
scientifically, with all the studies, you can show doesn't make sense. And
and they are so set in their ways too.
and they're loud. This is the way, and you guys are screwing this up. Well, when you really look at it, it's like I'm not screwing this up. I'm doing it the way it should be done.
Yeah. Exactly. And that I have experienced this switching to SOGs. When I volunteered, that is what we did
Right.
was SOGs. So I had been exposed to it, but a lot of the people that I work with had not been exposed to the SOG driven, um, the tactical approach. And the problem with that is remember, man, people were so set in like, we don't want to be like other jurisdictions. We don't want to be like them. We're losing our identity. We're losing who we are. No, they're moving ahead and we are being left behind.
Right.
And luckily, we did get, I think that's what I can, an administration in that could see, that had the experience with the SMGs. It was able to bring a new, fresh perspective. I think that's the best way to put it.
Yeah. A different perspective.
Right. Because I'm not saying, I think all of our administrations that I've had in my career have given us something positive, have moved the fire department forward. But this is the biggest change that I have seen in my career that really people were so just against.
Yeah. So I think that a lot of the new perspective is not necessarily fresh. It's that it's different. Somebody else is already doing that SOP somewhere. Somebody else, we're learning from their mistakes and we're learning from what they do good. And we bring it in and say, there's a different way. What about this? And the people that follow the fire service understand that happens. The people that come to this as a job don't always understand it.
If people want to understand why we do what we do, start reading Line Identity Death Report.
Sure.
If they want to understand why we're making changes, why we have tactical discipline, and why we are not using tradition in the name of those behaviors. Because remember, if you go back to what the definition is, culture is a behavior
Yes.
where the tradition is pride, duty, and honor. And again, that's where I think we're blurring the line with, well, we don't want to be their identity. It's not saying that you're going to have their identity. I don't know how many people in the American Fire Service, when somebody leaves the station, hides them. And anybody who knows that reference knows that that's a thing. So, but that is a tradition, right? That is something that is done, a ritual that is not negative. That is not, that is something that makes people feel included. It just makes them feel like they were a part of the crew. So to give a little background on it for people who don't know, when you apply someone, when they leave the station, let's say they get transferred or they get promoted
Or retire.
or retire. Yeah. In a lot of cases, it's done as a way to say, like, we're really going to miss you. We really love working with you. And it is something it's a send off. I think that's the best way to say it. Like, it's a good send off. So that is a tradition that we have. And that's not hindering, it's not hindering progress. That is not hindering progress.
Okay. I agree with you.
You know
No.
what you're going to say.
No, you don't.
Okay.
But you just said that that's a send off and it's done because they quote unquote like you. That's why it's done.
Respect you.
Yeah. Respect, like,
Yeah.
but we have 180 degree different when you come into the fire service. When you
I didn't know you were going to say that.
Nope.
This is a good point.
when you leave the fire service, they hit you with an aluminum pie pan with whipped cream. That's the pie.
When you leave. Yeah.
But when you come in, you can be exposed to hazing. You could be exposed to, in some cases, sexual assault. You can be exposed to a lot of things, But that person coming in thinks that they're being exposed to that because that's how they're accepted. That's how they're like. It's very different than
They
the
don't
lead,
speak up because they don't want to be not included as a part of the team.
or they don't want to be looked at as you're not part of the team, so I'm not going to give you my knowledge.
Yeah, that's more of like the be seen, not heard, and leaving out, which our energy needs to be put into. It really does. Like, we need to change our mindset that our energy should be into training and should be into promoting that team approach. And again, if if you don't understand, go back and listen to our last podcast, two podcasts ago, I guess, empowerment versus entitlement, because I do think there's a fine line there. And you can still be, let's say, hard on people or, go through the process of learning to trust them and then trust you without making them feel completely,
Right.
just not a part of the team. And that's an important thing to learn, that you learn with experience, that you learn with research, that you learn with understanding how people's brains work. And again, this job is not for everyone.
And,
So,
and you talked about we should be relying on training. We should be relying on different things than taking somebody to a backboard.
well, cooking together.
Mhm.
I'm a big fan of dinners together. Lunch doesn't always work out because,
There's just too much going on during the day.
yeah. But our traditions and our culture should be the tradition of training, should be the culture of training, should be the approach of inclusivity, as far as this person was assigned to me and I'm their field trainer. And I'm going to take pride in making sure that they are the best that they can be. And I'm going to pour myself into them. And when they leave me, I know that I made the fire service better by what I gave them and how they were able to perform when they left my crew.
So I want to talk about training for a second because I think this is something that's important. As you've come up through the fire service, have you ever been given a training scenario, a training task, something that you knew you were doing it right, but no matter what you were doing, you weren't going to win?
Yeah.
And that is something that we have to get away from. Every scenario should be winnable. Everything you do should be winnable. It doesn't mean that you will win. It just means that it should be winnable. And that was something that I had to learn in the police academy that I really wish I knew when I was training recruiters, because every scenario you go into in the police academy was winnable. And a lot of people lost them.
And everybody gets a trophy. But I guess you're not changing it to make it harder and harder and harder so that they don't win.
Right.
The scenario is a scenario, and either you succeed or you don't succeed, which I do think we do now, at least in my department, with like a competency evaluation. It's the same end game for everybody. And either you are performing to the level that's expected of you or you're not. But I do want to reserve that conversation for another podcast episode when we get into training, into recruits and that standard, because I think we could do a whole podcast episode on that. So when it comes down to the grit of it, I really just think we need to focus more on thinking to yourself when you are doing something, thinking it's not going we're doing it because that's the way it's always been done. And that is like one way that you can figure out if it is hindering progress, if it's a cultural thing or traditional thing. And well, why are you wearing those three-quarter boots? Well, that's the way it's always been done.
Why are you wearing? There's still people out there that are doing this. They're doing it in the right situations, but they're still doing it. Watch the videos, watch the news stories, watch all that. There are still people that are wearing the orange fireball gloves. They're using them now because they're waterproof and they can work with the hoses and stuff and not get their hands wet. But that was a firefighting glove years ago, and they proved how many people got burned.
I had no idea.
They proved how many people got burned because it didn't let the steam out of the glove. So
I've seen plenty of people who have them. Is it
yep,
for picking up lines and your hands not getting wet?
that was a firefighting glove at one time that we had to evolve away from.
Yeah.
you
But
know?
that's interesting. But, saying to yourself, well, that's just the way that it's always been done. That's just the way I've always done it. For me, we have a choice between male and female pants. And when I came into the department, again, I was 20. So I was like, if for the males' pants, they come hemmed, but the women's don't come hemmed. And they're just not made for women's bodies. Like you have to get them altered one way or another. Um, so for 18, almost 19 years, I wore men's pants.
Sure. That's what was available.
Yeah. And they did not fit me right.
No.
They just did not fit right. But I started it because I was in the academy and I didn't want to take the time to get them hemmed. I just was focusing on so much other stuff. And then I just did it forever. And why did I do it? Because that's the way
It's always been done.
right? So I had another female. This is the same for my coat, my turnout coat. I was wearing men's turnout coats, and that's just the way I've always done it. That's the way you see it. Like the coats are longer. That's the tradition of the fire service. But when I would get down to duck walk or when I would put it on because of my shape, it was not as easy for me to work. So I had to start evolving and I got a shorter coat that was made for females. It was so much nicer, so much easier to work in. It just
It's
fit better.
cut differently,
Right.
fits differently.
So I did do that more than 3 years ago or 4 years ago. But more recently, I did have another female talk me into trying the women's pants. And I was like,
Hmm.
I don't know if I can go back to it. It was too much. I was doing it for this way for so long. And it actually turns out that I do like them better.
Right. You
So
just have to
like,
take a little more time to get them hemmed and
right.
shaped for what you
Okay,
want.
like think about it on a broader scale, right? Don't knock it before you try it.
Right.
Don't knock the new gloves that are better until you try it. Don't knock, wearing your waist belt on your NCBA. It's so much harder on my shoulders and my back if I don't have the waist belt on and putting it on correctly. So, like, don't knock it. Put it on correctly and see the difference in the longevity of your back and your shoulders by wearing it that way. The shorter coat versus longer coat. Now, the only thing I can't get on board with, and this is going to come out in another podcast that I'm on as a guest, that's a Copperman State Fireman. The only thing I can't get on board with is the European style helmet.
Right.
Because I really do feel like, first of all, the helmet does its job.
It's
So
better.
it's not a safety issue.
Ultimately, it's a better helmet, but I'm with you. I can't get on board with it either.
Yeah. But why is that, right? And I think the reason is because I do think that is a traditional thing. And when you look at it, that's an American firefighter. When you look at that style helmet, and there's even helmets that are branded differently for different areas in the United States. So I just think that is something that is traditional, but it's not like the 3/4 boots where people are getting hurt because they're wearing it or they're not able to go and perform their job. It's still tried and true to this day. It still performs exceptionally well. It does do its job. And it is something that is an American firefighter, that is an identifier for us.
Correct. So
So
why don't you think people want to go to that helmet? Just out of curiosity. It's a resistance to what?
I think it's an identity issue.
And a resistance to change.
Well, yes, but I don't think I can do it.
I don't think I could do it either. But the point that I'm going to make here is it's resistance to change. The fire service, you hear over and over again, 200 years of tradition unimpeded by progress. The fire service is the most change resistant you will ever find. Yet we have more firefighters that invent different tools and make
Right.
changes
Yeah.
than any other
And the helmet has evolved.
company out there. The helmet hasn't.
It has evolved. But for me, I don't know if I would. Again, I haven't tried it. Don't knock it till you try it. I'm basically eating my own words here.
I've never tried one, but I can tell you, I've watched a lot of videos with no one around me, so they didn't know I was watching them.
Oh, no.
Whatever. They're showing the European fire helmets and they're showing masking up and they're showing how it works. And I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, "Hey, that's really cool. It works really
It
well."
works really great in Europe.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I mean, some of those countries, don't even have hose line.
Yeah.
Right? Like Iceland.
Yeah.
Like they're putting on the European helmet and they don't even.
I mean, they have them, but they have so few fire departments in Iceland. When we were there, we looked at that.
Yeah, I'm sorry. If somebody's from Iceland and they end up listening,
It's not that it's a bad fire service. It's just that they don't have the same fire problem we do.
yeah. And I just think it's one thing that in that situation, if the problem isn't broke, you don't need to fix it. But with the 3/4 boot specifically,
It was broke.
well, and the reason is why, because what we were building with was changing. It was burning hotter, it was burning faster.
Oh, that's not, I hate to.
Oh God.
It was burning hotter. You hear that over and over and
Well,
over again.
because it's burning, it's a different fuel.
It's a different fuel.
Here comes a fire. But
Here comes the fire investigator part of it. The fire is not hotter today than it was in 1900. The fire is the same temperature. A birthday candle and a house are the same temperature.
Okay.
But it's the amount of heat that these fuels are putting out
Yes.
that has changed. That's where it really comes from.
But if it's the amount of heat, by definition, is that hotter?
No, definition,
Oh my God.
hotter is a temperature.
Okay, but if it's burning more,
You'd have a greater heat release rate,
which makes it,
more energy, not hotter, more energy.
I don't know. I've been in fires that were hotter than others.
They're all the same. If it's the same color flame, it's the same exact temperature.
But they're hotter than others because it's burning.
You can have different fuels that burn different
Because
things.
the fuel is burning different. So I do think it depends on the structure.
But it's definitely the heat release rate that hurts us more now than anything to do with temperature.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so I feel like we've given a good amount for our listeners to kind of chew on and discuss. Again, not everybody is going to agree with our perspectives. I think sometimes we don't even agree with each other's
We don't always agree with each other.
But I think that's healthy.
Yeah.
I think it's healthy, and I do think that's how we do move forward. Somebody sees things differently than I do and has a different perspective on it, and I go, man, I never thought about it that way. I just never thought about it that way. I didn't think about the heat release thing until you just said it.
Yeah.
So it definitely is something that we want our listeners to go back to, that we want them to discuss and really think about why we do what we do. And what is the why behind our behaviors, our traditions, the culture that we have, the equipment that we wear, the apparatus that we ride on, and what drives the policy change. I think that they're going to find that a lot of our policy changes are driven by learning from previous line of duty deaths.
We learn from our mistakes. It's
We do.
absolutely
And
true.
And the thing is, the mistakes, well, not intentional. It's just we're faced with new things. Line of duty deaths come from stuff where we're like, oh man, none of us knew that it was going to do that. And then we have to learn from that. They
Well,
could not die in vain.
And the actual death by fire products has decreased. We still have line of duty deaths, but we're not burning to death the same number of firefighters now than we did in the 50s and 60s and 70s because of exactly what we've done. We've learned.
But we are also just as, if not more, aggressive.
Yes.
We've just evolved.
Yes, absolutely.
And I, for one, really like to be aggressive. Like I'm all in for that.
Right.
I also want it to be smart. So I think that's it.
Okay.
Thank you for tuning in. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody.
We hope that you get something out of this and you're able to have thought-provoking discussion. And I'm sorry that we're a couple of days late. I've been working a lot, but we'll see you in a couple weeks. So thanks again for listening in. We'll see you soon.
Take care.